when I read your poetry, I always have a very intense sense of surprise.
Good, good, good. Because I don't think a poem should be what I already know. If I know it, why sit down and write it?
This installment of the Poetry.LA interview series features Holly Prado. To begin her conversation with Mariano Zaro, Holly reads some of her reflections on poetry and her writing career.
3 things I know about poetry. 1, writing it reveals a self more deeply attuned to beauty and meaning than the ordinary ego-centered daily self. 2, reading it puts me in touch with the depth of other human beings' responses to living, breathing, creating, dying. 3, the proliferation of people writing poetry in the past 25 years or so, mostly through MFA programs, tells me that the American soul is much in need of difficult, complex, gorgeous art. I began to write poetry intensively in 1970 after doing a lot of writing in college but then dropping it. I've always been drawn to poetry, to all forms of writing. When I found Alvaro Cardona Hines' poetry workshop and began to take my work more seriously than ever before, I couldn't have said why. Now, I know I was desperate for the creative self who'd been hidden away in the tumult of early adulthood. I was desperate to grieve, to praise, to really look at things. When I discovered a lot of images from nature coming into my work, I realized I was accessing the soul of my mother and of the great mother, the muse, who inspires and supports all my efforts. Teaching in the way I do developed over time. I believe I've matured in my vision of writing and assisting the creative process in others, primarily because other writers have been willing to come to my workshops, risk their work, and trust me to help them move in the direction of their individual natures. Nothing I do brings me greater pleasure than sharing my life with my husband, the poet and actor Harry Northup, and writing, teaching, reading, staying open to whatever asks me to embrace it creatively.
So you said that you started to write intensely in the 70s, but
Right.
I think in 4th grade you wanted to write a theater play.
It was not a good play, but it got on the stage at Hartley Elementary School in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I had in the 6th grade my first real literary friend, Sandra Whalen. And she and I did write together, shut away in her bedroom. We wrote about witches, and we read Saturday Evening Post serial stories, and we read Ogden Nash poetry. And that was our literary life. It got me started. I had some work in the very, very late 50s. I graduated from college in Michigan in 1960, and I had some poems published in a college literary magazine. But really, the minute I got out of college, I came to Los Angeles, dropped writing because I needed to figure out what I was going to do to earn a living, figure out relationships, figure out the city, which I always knew was exactly the place for me to be.
Why do you say that?
Some places want you and some places don't. And Los Angeles, for whatever peculiar reasons, always wanted me. When I did find Alvaro Cardona Hines' writing workshop, when I did begin to make connections with poets, everything opened up for me. And the Los Angeles literary community has been wonderfully welcoming since the early 1970s.
Have you seen trends going and leaving, or what's your take on that kind of history of LA poetry since the 70s?
I think Los Angeles has always fostered the individual. We live far away from each other. If there was ever really a poetry scene, it was probably the beat poets in Venice. John Thomas, Philomene Long were king and queen of poetry in Venice for a long time. The only thing I notice about Los Angeles is that the writing is extremely personal. It's very personal.
You have written a lot of books from this, more seriously from the 70s. Do you think all these poems have been born from the same core, from the same place?
I have always been working to make visible and redeem the feminine soul. My mother died when I was 16, and I have always felt that generally the feminine soul in our culture is sorely missing. I believe that in Los Angeles, poets are open to hearing that soul, that there are women writers. I never felt that I was discriminated against because I was a woman writing poetry. And wonderful women writers have come forward and been very self-revelatory. One of the best books of poetry I read last year was Holiday Mason's book, Dissolve. And there are terrific women writers as well as men writers working in LA.
Maybe this is a good moment for you to read the first poem. It's called Why I Write.
This is from my book, Esperanza, Poems for Orpheus, and these are all about the inspiration of Orpheus, the divine singer, and of course he moved into the underworld to try to rescue his wife, Eurydice. So some of that comes up here. The dog, of course, is the dog of hell. Why I Write. The dog whose teeth catch dinner and it's raw, the blood just starting to give off its nourishment. I write about my mother dying. I write that now and ever. Other faces smash against the high, lost wall, but turn around and love the sun as much. I never turn. It's all those motorcycles parked across the street, not smiling, and with women, with our mothers who would leave the house as quickly as they died, would be with gods who picked them out of crowds to drive into the air, to lose their daughters in the trees. I'll never get her back. Orpheus gives meaning to the horror, gives meat. The hell dog has a multitude of heads, and so do I. Keeps breaking its own skulls. Lament that protein.
Your poetry at the same time feels very complex with the changes of the rhythms and the grammar, but at the same time it feels very organic, like it's almost like that's the way she speaks.
I hope so. I hope so.
It's
Contemporary American poetry is very much in the American idiom of speech. I never use words that I think are overwrought or archaic. I think William Carlos Williams taught us a great deal about using our own language and staying with the image. The image is vital to me.
You taught at USC for almost 20
20
years, yes,
Mhm.
and then you have conducted a lot of private workshops.
Yes, for almost 40 years.
Wow.
It's a great joy to me to work with adults who are devoted to their own writing and their own creative process, people who have a creative gift, have a responsibility to make use of that gift. I think it's vital. I think it's vital for our culture. And people often want to get published. And I say, whether or not you're published, everything you write goes into the collective creative psyche. It's there.
It's there.
It's affecting our shattered world for the good. What more can you ask?
I would like to talk a little bit about the life of a poem. Let's in your case, from the moment the poem is born to the moment you said that the poem is ready. How is that time? Is there a long editing process? Every case is different. Do you have a pattern?
It is different.
Okay.
It is different. But I like moving a poem through as many drafts as possible. I love revision. Revision. Because I go deeper and deeper. People resist revision because they think of it as you've done something wrong, so you have to edit, or you have to cut things out, or expand something. You've done it wrong to begin with. That is never true. Rough drafts can have glitches in them, but you've got the material. So then you begin to look at the material and say, all right, what does this really want to say? What is going on here? And you begin to delve into it in the most delicious way. I always appreciate Charles Olson's notion of projective verse, that you discover the poem as you write it. The hardest part of any poem for me is the end, because I don't know what I've discovered until I've written the poem. And sometimes it takes a number of drafts before I find the real ending.
When I read your poetry, I always have a very intense sense of surprise.
Good, good. Because I don't think a poem should be what I already know. If I know it, why sit down and write it?
Yeah. What I see that element of surprise more intensely is in your nature poems and in your love poems. Because I think nature and love are very prone to cliché, very prone to repeat things that have been already written, and you have, I think the way nature appears in your poetry is fantastic, and your love poems are very unique. So the surprise element is very intense in the nature poems and in the love poems.
Thank you.
And there is also something I would like to talk about. Probably you have been asked this question many times. You said that dreams are sacred. What's the role of dreams in your creative process?
I have been involved in Jungian analysis for almost 40 years, and I still consult once a month with my longtime Jungian analyst. She now lives in Colorado, and we talk on the phone, and I read her a couple of dreams that I've had during the month, and we discuss them. I'm deeply interested still in the work of C.G. Jung and the idea of the unconscious as a creative source. I don't necessarily write about my dreams in my poetry, but they inform the poetry with as much depth as possible. A few nights ago, I dreamed that I was in an enormous library, and this dream was a great gift. I believe it was the library of all the words in the world, and it was astonishing. And I thought, this is such a beautiful place to come to in my old age, to be in a place in the psyche where all the words are. This is from a series called Dream Combinations, and I really was simply trying to get the feeling of dreams which is irrational but not crazy. There is a kind of mystery within a dream, within its images, but it's not madness. It's something beautiful. Generations. Black grape skin covers ribs beneath my dress, covers breast loaves, covers breast horns. Little girl dolls, their arms and legs and heads make a stew. One a squawking duck mouth, one a rubber map of lumps, the most crooked nose. Without a mother, I eat the child, black juice, gradually, under the dress. Half-mad eater of dolls, lover of dolls, tear them. Even to bone, the yearning when I wake up, the house where I kill to make blood flow, crippled walking, major resurrection, obscene and worn out thrift shop clothes ready for another color. Rose occurs and occurs, even limping, I eat. One a butterfly with plastic cheeks. It takes so much sex to grow fat on myself. Lip force, flesh knock, the juice ferments. Break up housekeeping, half-mad guilt in the lap of leafy fate. I carry it everywhere with me. I watch the colors change. I bury what's left. You can see that that is a process of deep grief and the violence of grief. Again, it references the mother, the loss of the mother, and the attempt to find some kind of transformation. At this point, when I was writing these, the only thing to be done was bury what's left.
Probably you have been asked this question many times, the difference between poetry and prose poems, because you have poems and then you have prose poems. The first question I have is, when do you know that a piece you're writing is a poem or a prose poem? Does it happen from the very beginning, or you know about it at a certain point in the creating process?
Oddly, the form comes with the writing. When I sit down to write, there are short lines or there are long lines. I love both. I've been working on short prose pieces lately. Autobiographical pieces that have some elements of story. I'm not interested in conventional short stories, but I'm interested in what we tell each other as story. What gets us about story, because it's such a human instinct to want to hear story and tell story. So I've been working in prose. Prose poetry simply allows a much longer breath, which is wonderful for some things. And it's not so wonderful for others. Lines in contemporary poetry are not counted out by metric feet. They are units of breath. And you notice when I read my poems, I try to pay attention to each line as a unit of breath. That gives the poem a very different quality from prose. In a prose poem, I'm freer to read the lines as sentences, because that's what they are. But there is still the lyric voice, the emphasis on imagery. I'm not interested in any kind of story. I'm interested in something usually more impressionistic.
I would like to do a little experiment with you, so if you don't mind. There are two pieces from war rituals. One is number 3, and the other one is number 11. They are both from the same collection. It's a book from the 80s, War Rituals. The first one, War Ritual 3, is a poem, and the other one, War Rituals 11, is a prose poem. So would you mind reading them?
Word Rituals 3. The word in the ice in the glass of water. The word in the stain that appears on a white dress in a dream of burning. The word in the temperature dropping 20 degrees after the sun sets. The word in the belly of the cat, a stranger who comes to eat food outside the house. The word between the toes. The word that runs along the border between countries. The word that tastes of two things at once. The word that sits in the wine as the wine grows older and older, darker and darker. The word that is the color between the tongue and the mouth. The word that apologizes to the dead flowers. The word that opens the gate when I'm nowhere near the gate. The word that remembers everything all the time. The word that turns my head so I miss the most important moment. Word Rituals 11. The truest word. It is never said. It hums behind me as I watch myself speak, staying as honest as I can, but never saying the word that would open everything. Words as I know them make sense. I ask them to explain love, boredom, loss, pleasure, work, greed, fear. But the one unsaid word explains nothing, simply opens so suddenly that it has to be entered. And then everything is gone. Everything is fresh. Imagine to look at the cut on my finger and to see that it is pulling apart even as it heals. To look at my collection of stones, of pens, of candles, of shoes, and to see the planet Venus 26 million miles away. To look at the papers in the trash and to see goldfish circling their pond. To look at the mask of a vampire on my wall and to see a sister. Did you hear a difference?
Completely, yeah. It helped that you explained it before, but even without the explanation, you can tell the difference in the breathing and the pause. Thank you for doing the experiment.
Sure.
The other question I have is regarding Cahuenga Press. If you could talk a little bit about how it started and the poets involved with it.
Thank you for asking. Cahuenga Press is very important in my life. This was Harry's inspiration. He and I had talked for a long time about a cooperative press. We had seen over the years small literary presses die because one editor-publisher could not do all the work. So we had talked about a cooperative press of some kind, and then Harry said, let's do it. What people would you like to work with in a cooperative press, and how should we set it up? We asked Phoebe McAdams to join, and Bill Moore, Cecilia Wallach, Harry and I, James Cushing. Eventually, Cecilia and Bill left the press, so now there are 4 of us. I'll read our statement. Our common goal is to create fine books of poetry by poets whose work we admire and respect, to make poetry actual in the world in ways which honor both individual creative freedom and cooperative support. Because there are 4 of us, we can share the work. We've been going since 1989, and we are about to do, I think it's our 21st book.
And to end the conversation, I would like to ask you one more favor, to read a poem that is in the very beginning of this book, These Mirrors Prove
Okay.
It. And it's a short poem, it's called The Garden.
this was the first decent poem I ever wrote. The line, "Each man will take with him," was written before I became involved with the feminist movement in the mid-1970s. I would change that language today, but here's the poem. The Garden. Rilke has said that each man will take with him from the earth one word that he loves most. I have been thinking all evening, just in case, and can't go beyond lizard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.